M&A Advisor is very pleased to be joined today by John K. Castle, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer at Castle Harlan. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, it's my privilege. I'm delighted to be here today. It's very nice to be with you.
Why, thank you. Tell us about your company and what you do with your company.
Well, Castle Harlan, as well as Branford Castle, which is another company that I'm involved with, are very much focused in the middle market and focused in buying companies, usually control positions in the middle market. Now, Castle Harlan focuses generally on companies that are greater than 100 million. Branford focuses on companies that are somewhat smaller, typically below $100 million in market value. The differences are that above 100 million is probably a lot more sophisticated market in the sense that the major investment banks, the major law firms and so forth are involved, whereas below 100 million it's more likely that the transactions are involved business brokers, very professional people and so forth, but those are not areas that are not typically as attractive to the very major investment banks, major law firms and so forth. So we very much like focusing on companies that have a strong proprietary position, some moderate level of growth, and usually we're doing LBO type of transactions where we're putting some leverage on the balance sheet in terms of doing the transaction also.
Which sectors are you seeing with the most activity, and which do you think will continue going into the rest of 16 and 17?
Well, in terms of sectors, our focus is pretty broad. We do things that range from consumer to industrial manufacturing to oil services, and we do restaurants in many cases, and distribution too. At Castle Harlan we own Baker & Taylor, which is the world's largest book distributor, for instance. And so we do a wide variety of areas, and it isn't so much a function of the focus on sectors as a focus on is this a company with a strong competitive position, a company that's in a position to grow in the future, sustain its position in the business and so forth, and things of that nature, as opposed to being terribly concerned about the specific sectors. There's some sectors that we wouldn't be very involved in, high tech being one, places where there's a lot of change. We don't normally get involved in fashion, which is also an area of considerable change. And so we want growing but stable kinds of businesses and so forth. And that's kind of where we put our focus.
Do you think that the activity that we've been seeing, the robust activity, will continue through to 2016 and 17?
Yeah, I think 2016 is likely to continue to be a year of good activity. It may not be quite as robust as 14 and 15 were. As you know, in the leveraged buyout world, the availability of debt is frequently an important factor in terms of the amount of the price that people will pay and so forth. And it would appear that maybe there's a little less debt available than there was a year or two ago. And so I think that may affect prices a little bit and the verve with which people go ahead and do transactions. But none of that, net, I think it's going to continue to be a pretty interesting time.
Do you mind if I go a little bit broader, just because you have been at this for such a long time and you have seen so many changes over the years. When you first got into the business, did you ever picture the world the way it is now, with the M&A activity the way it is now, and the acquisitions?
Well, cross-border transactions were no doubt less likely to occur than they are today. Although even relatively early in my career, we did a lot of very international things. I was involved in the international seismic business, oil service business back in the 1970s, and we had operations in essentially every area of the world, including the Middle East and Asia and every place from Papua New Guinea to Saudi Arabia to Ecuador and Peru and so forth. And so that was a very international experience. Similarly, I built a company, and I'm talking about, once again, back in the late 60s and early 70s, in the environmental pollution control field. And once again, that was a very international activity also. And in my business experience, which is actually 50 years, I've been involved in doing businesses in virtually every area, if not every country, every area of the world. But that has become somewhat more sophisticated, modern communications, modern mechanisms for exchanging information and so forth, has perhaps made it a little more active area than it was, but I've been doing it for a long time.
You certainly have, and your name is a globally known name. What would you like? I'm going to get more philosophical, and I'm going to throw out everything else we were supposed to be talking about for a moment. Philosophically, what would you like your legacy? I mean, more than 50 years. What would you like your legacy to be, or is it already in the works?
Well, that's a very difficult thing to say. I think an area that's kind of interesting in terms of legacy is possibly, though, the innovator. And that, I believe I was among the very first people to ever use a limited partnership along with institutional investors to create funds that could be used for private equity and so forth. And I was intimately involved with the creation of the Sprout Fund, the first Sprout Fund at Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette back in 1969. And as far as I know, that was the first instance of using a limited partnership where we were in a position to bring in institutional investors. And our institutional investors at that time were in many cases many of the same names as we hear today. They were doing much smaller positions, but they were the same thing. So that was an area of innovation. I also think I was very involved in, as you know, I formed a company called Castle Conley, America's Top Doctors. And I think we were among the first to ever say, hey, top doctors make a difference. And it was an interesting innovation in terms of helping people identify the best medical health care. Now, things have evolved since then, and other people are trying to do things that Castle Conley does in that respect, but that was kind of an unusual new thing. So in a certain interesting way, I think I have innovated and created, some of the things that I did are much of the basis of the entire private equity business that we have today. And similarly, some of the things that have been done have had a major influence on healthcare.
What advice would you give to somebody, just like you were way back, 50 years ago starting out, someone just getting involved in M&A right now, or just starting out following their life's passion, as you did? What advice would you give them?
Well, the first thing I would do is follow my life's passion. I think if you do things that you really like to do and are interested in doing and so forth, obviously you're going to do them better. And in addition to that, you're just going to have a lot more fun with your life and so forth than if you do something that others have defined for you. The second thing is just lots of hard work. There's no substitute for lots of hard work, and your success is going to be driven by the kind of intensity of work that the effort that you put into doing things. So that's a very important consideration.
Absolutely, it's something that never goes out of style. Mr. Castle, it was my pleasure to talk to you
God
today.
bless you. It's great to be with you, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much.